a part of the conversation.
I stream it all at work, and I stream it to my phone and listen to it wherever I go.
TNT.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. We're in the second hour of this live broadcast. I'm Patrick Henningsen, your host. A big thank you to Trevor Fitzgibbon. He's done PR for WikiLeaks, and his clients right now are in a major legal battle to determine what's going to be the outcome of the narrative of this Julian Assange case, at least on the United States side. We'll be getting updates from Trevor in due course. Really appreciate his commentary. Now, we're going to do a hard pivot right back to the Middle East, but also from a UK perspective. I'm going to welcome onto the program human rights lawyer Mohammed Akunjee is joining us right now from London. Thank you for joining us, Mohammed. How are you?
My pleasure. Very well, thank you.
Now, the situation, as you're very aware, right now that's building up at the Rafah border crossing in southern Gaza is absolutely horrendous. We've even seen Benny Gantz himself grace the Israeli mainstream media in the last 24 hours, saying that they're planning to do it and they're going to do it on Ramadan. I cannot tell you and tell everybody how inflammatory that situation will be if that is indeed the case. But I can't believe we're actually watching this scenario unfold right now. I would like to get to your comments and your thoughts on this initially, this situation right now that's building up at Rafah. Mohammed, go ahead.
Sure. So just to remind everyone, this sort of what has actually been adjudicated to be something that's the foothills of a genocide by the ICJ. That's been building up, and we've been seeing this unfold on our social media from the 8th of October onwards. Such was the horror of the military attacks on the civilian population of Gaza, particularly the northern part of Gaza, that the South Africans brought a case of genocide with interim measures in the International Court of Justice. Now, that court looked at the available evidence that was very scant, but on the face of it, even at that point, before we've got this massive pressure of Palestinians' movement from the north to the south, even at that point, the ICJ was so concerned that they put interim orders in place, basically commanding or ordering Israel not to engage in behavior that could be genocidal. Now, the ICJ expected a report from Israel by the 28th of February about what they've done or what they would have done to put that order into place. 28th of February is still a week or so away. But clearly in the interim, Israel's not changed its behavior at all. In fact, what we now see is a massing of troops, a declaration, and as you say, a very inflammatory declaration, that Israeli troops are going to go into the south where all of the population of Gaza is now concentrated. That will clearly be a genocide if they open fire on those civilians, and their intention is to push them into the Sinai and into Egypt, something that Egypt says it will not find as acceptable. There will be no clearer indication. There is no clearer indication of the massing for a genocide. And today, as we speak, by 7 p.m., we're at 5 p.m. now, but at 7 p.m. in the UK Parliament, there's been machinations around a proposal for a ceasefire, a very clear proposal by the SNP, Scottish National Party. It's quite telling that it takes the Scottish Party to prick our conscience and ask for the stop to the killing rather than any of the traditional English parties. And then we've also had some amendments played out rather, in a rather, let's say, non-conventional manner, where we have two more amendments that have been placed, which water down the effect of the SNP motion. Now, what's very clear here is that the UK public are extremely vociferous and extremely vocal in their desire for there to be a ceasefire, and it's very clear that the English parties, all three, well, two of them, the opposition and the government, are moving heaven and earth to try and block that from being expressed. That they really want the Israelis to have the right or the space to do what they want. That's where we are at the moment, despite all the rhetoric we've heard from Biden and about the civilian life and what have you. We're about to see the guillotine fall on 1.2 million people with no justification whatsoever.
So, we know where Washington stands on all issues, Mohammed, in that as the global hegemon, they probably don't feel the need to abide by any international conventions, any treaties, or any provisions coming down from any of the various bodies. However, the United Kingdom, powerful as it is on the UN Security Council, they are a signatory to the ICC, to the Genocide Convention, to many other international treaties and conventions, various and sundry. If they go ahead with this current posture on this issue, they themselves will be held liable at some point. I think it's just unavoidable that the wheels of international justice are turning right now. And so where does that leave the people in power right now in Britain, the prime minister, the party, the cabinet? If the ICJ process continues and through the UN General Assembly, United for Peace resolution, there's a lot of things that can happen over the next couple of months and years, Mohammed. So the actions and the positions that politicians in these countries are taking today, they may be looked back upon in the future as things progress. My question to you is, as somebody who, of course, yourself also involved in politics, is any of this being factored into the minds of any of our political class right now?
Well, I think the fact that we have a Labour Party particularly who has tabled a motion that is asking for, quote unquote, a humanitarian ceasefire is a massive U-turn on their original position. That they have no intention, of moving politically in the UK against the motion of Israel's direction of travel. Now, the fact that they've had to table this motion is because there is so much anger and expressed anger by demonstrations that have been taking place week after week in the UK in unprecedented scales, with an unprecedented consistency, where the UK public is expressing its concern and actually particularly pointing in the direction of the Labour Party, which has traditionally been a party that's supposed to uphold human rights. Interestingly, that party is headed up by an accomplished lawyer, Keir Starmer, who is a KC, and despite being a human rights lawyer, has literally decided to read the human rights book backwards when it comes to this issue, and implement the sort of upside down cross approach to the issue of this sort of killing. So that this altogether has raised the ire. But what's slightly different now is that the electorate's got a little bit more sophisticated in that it's got organized, it's started looking at the demographics and the polling around this issue, and now independent candidates, one of which is myself, have started to come forward and challenge the Labour Party in very, very safe seats. So the seat that I'm challenging, that's a 27,000 majority. Interesting is that the current Labour MP there has pretty much the same majority in votes as a number of people who have been murdered in Palestine at the moment. So it'd be a like-for-like swap here. So this is, the Labour Party are now aware that they cannot bank on the voters that they believe that would vote for them traditionally because of the betrayal of their principles. Those voters are now very angry at them and looking for alternatives. I guess the political calculus of the day was that the government and the opposition were in lockstep in terms of their approach to Israel, and so their thinking would be that the electorate would have nowhere to go. There'd be no other options because one is like for like. And so the rise of independence is now providing a third option, which I believe is extremely necessary in the body politic in order to break the hegemony or break the monopoly that our two political parties have over the system. And where you have a monopoly, you often have abuse. That's why we have antitrust in the United States, in Europe, these ideas that companies cannot be allowed to dominate the market because they will then go against the interests of the consumer and against the interests of law and business ethic. Now, here, politically, we've allowed that to happen. I think you've got that in the US with your two-party system, and in the UK, we have that with our two-party system. And in the UK, you can see how utterly captured it is because you have 75% of the British public wanting a ceasefire, and the two main parties, in the middle of a hotly contested election year, are both in lockstep, going against the interest of 50 million people, 75% of the British public. Now, one has to ask, what sort of lobbying power does an outside group have that allows for it to control the two main parties and have them turn their back on the vast majority of their electorate? Now, when that does happen, as it has happened now, it means that we have a sham of a democracy. We do not have a democracy. We have the pretense of one, which is simply captured.
And it's not unlike the situation in 2003. We all remember what that was like. The Blair government was potentially could have easily been pushed and toppled if the conservatives wanted to seize the opportunity on a very unpopular, hugely unpopular Iraq war, which seemed to be a fait accompli. But as we know, Mohammed, that the U.S. can't go in on any major policy without Britain by its side to give an appearance of a coalition or appearance of some kind of consensus in the Western world. Same goes for this issue as well. So that transatlantic partnership must be upheld. Otherwise, this is not good for Washington. They're pretty much on their own at that point. Do you think that's the same type of situation here?
I think the relationships are being so strained now internally within the UK that we've seen a member of the royal family, and we have a very different constitutional makeup to the US. Our politicians are the power, but the theoretical sort of source of legitimacy of the country is actually still the royal family, the king. Now, the Prince of Wales, that's his son, came out yesterday and gave a statement about stopping the killing in Gaza. He did so while he was wearing a uniform for the RAF, the Royal Air Force. Now, that's quite interesting because the UK involvement with the Israelis is through the Royal Air Force. It is through providing data, information, topography, and that's through aircraft and drones. And we've also been supplying material from Cyprus to Israel. So the fact that we have a sort of signal being sent by a member of the royal family about their views on this, that's raised quite a lot of consternation in the UK, and it's something that didn't even happen during the Iraq War, and that is quite a new development. Israel's sort of lobby is very, very upset with this about protocol, but one has to wonder why a country is involving itself in commentary about another country's protocol when the country complaining is breaking international law on the basis of potential genocide. So it's not really like for like here.
And it is important, independent candidates like yourself. We also have George Galloway in the Rochdale by-election as well. He seems to be making a challenge there. How much of a difference would it make? Because right now there's almost no dissenting opinion on the floor of the House of Commons. There are no sort of monologues that veer away from this kind of two-party duopoly consensus, especially on this issue, this key issue of what's happening with Palestine. This would make a big difference and may encourage other people as well to speak up and maybe adopt more sensible views on what clearly is a situation that's so out of control right now that it beggars belief. You can't even find anything to compare it with in modern history. I mean, if we go back to the Second World War, there were people that in Britain that supported the Nazis early before they entered the war, but obviously that changed. But at that time, everybody was basically backing Germany as the future of Europe. And all of a sudden, things went south pretty quickly on that. So looking at the long arc of history, Mohammed, on this, where we're at now might not be where we're going to be at in 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 years. So I think people have to really take that into consideration on the political calculus. Your thoughts?
Well, 1, 3 or 5 years is they say, a week is a long time in politics. But really, in terms of war, we're at a very precarious stage. We've already had the Houthis as an arm of effectively the Yemeni people, implementing their own policy, which bizarrely is pretty much in accordance really with the Genocide Convention, even though they're not signatories to it, which is that they're trying to militarily intervene on the supplies to Israel. That's now attracted the military intervention of themselves by the US and the UK ships. So we already have a hot war which involves other nations. Lebanon's being bombed, Syria, Damascus has been bombed, and we have a very fraught situation in Jordan as well. Even the King of Jordan recently has come out and expressed his very strong desire for this to end. Now, Israel's not listening to this. Israel's not listening to the ICJ. Israel is attempting to expand its engagement with pretty much all of its neighbors. And despite the countries that supply it with material, America and Britain, making verbal warnings publicly about this, they do not stop the supply of their material to carry on with this. And so we're at a point where things can trip over into a battle frame, which is going to be very difficult to tease ourselves out of. We also have to remember that our entire economic sort of balancing is moving from the global north to the global south. That is the direction of travel. I think 25% of our economic value has moved already in the last 10 years or so. And the global south becomes increasingly more important. The global south, on aggregate, do not see Hamas as a terrorist organization. The UK does, the United States does, but a vast majority of other nations do not. They see them as part of the valid resistance. And so where we're going to find ourselves in a conflict with the international community in general, as in terms of the UK and the US view of the situation versus Russia, China, and everyone else's, that puts us into a difficult framing when it comes to any other sort of international trade or development we want to do with any other country. This matter is in the interest of all parties to have resolved. The problem is that our politicians in the West have certainly provided so much cover for this that Israel has no reason to step away from the direction of travel it's put itself forward in.
No, and you bring up Hamas, of course, Hezbollah, the same conversation. A lot of countries in the global south governments don't regard them as a terrorist organization. I don't even think France has them as a proscribed terrorist organization for various reasons. And then we have Ansar Allah in Yemen, as you mentioned earlier, Mohammed, playing an absolutely key role right now in the geopolitics of the Middle East and having effects globally with the direct action that they're taking now. So, is it a case that you have countries like China, you have countries like Russia, other countries in the world, Brazil, they're becoming quite vocal on this Palestine issue right now. They're going to be engaging in dialogue with all of these governments, perhaps in the future with all of these entities, to try to get some kind of a solution or some harmonization of policy. But we have the G7 and the EU, who are basically not talking to anybody, and it's gunboat diplomacy right across the board. Though I see a major sort of division in how international relations is being done right now, and it's not looking good. This is a trend that is, I think, you probably might agree on this or not, but it's going in absolutely the wrong direction for the advanced Western countries right now. And that can only mean that war is facing us in the future, perhaps. But your thoughts on this?
Well, I think that the minute you step away from your values or certainly your laws, then you have no moral high ground. And it also means that the laws are there to be picked and chosen as to who to apply them with or who not to apply them with by the select few, the United States and the UK. What that means for everybody else is that when we have issues with a dictatorial regime in any other part of the world, we will not be able to control them. They will just laugh at us if we suggest that they follow human rights, when all they can simply do now is to say, well, look at Palestine. You presided over an actual genocide, despite your own courts sort of raising the flag on the issue. So I think that however weighted the rules-based order is in favor of one or country or another, or one set of countries or another, it's still a rules-based order which provides us some sort of certainty for where people can orientate themselves, countries can orientate themselves, and people know the red lines. That frankly speaking, the rules-based order is pretty much halfway in the bin right now. And it may be that it is irrecoverably in the trash can of history. And if that's the case, then we move back to a very much earlier system, which is really might is right. And that's at a time when might is moving away from the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere. So it's a very foolish precedent to set if, when the existing powers that have been exerting themselves for 200-300 years are now waning, that they decide to throw away the rule book just at the point when they're waning. It gives them no moral argument for when the global south decides to write their own rule book. And it may well be based upon the behavior that they've seen in the most recent episode, which is based on the Israel conduct. So I think in terms of the arc of nations and the arc of history, I can't think of a more foolish move to make at this point in history.
As you said, Mohammed, I can't think of a time when the U.S., Britain, its allies, when they need all of these allies, as they are sort of in their descendancy as global powers and looking perhaps to a multipolar world order in the future, or emerging power centers, balance of power, if you will. I can't think of a more crucial time for them to make their allies of everybody and not increase the amount of enemies they have. But the opposite seems to be happening. As you said, Mohammed, it absolutely doesn't make sense from their point of view. And again, this brings us back to the idea that perhaps the inevitability of a broader conflict, I'm talking about prior to World War I, power politics was the order of the day. There seemed to be, all the historians, there was an inevitability that this confrontation had to happen. And in fact, it did. What are the risks there going forward? If you can, your final comments before we close the segment on this.
Sure. I mean, I think that there are risks there to that, but we also know that our sort of ammunition supply in the northern hemisphere is pretty depleted. So the US are already splitting the supply of ammunition from Ukraine, away from Ukraine, and towards the Middle East zone. For a wider conflict, if we're already having to count our bullets effectively and pass them out in different arenas, then that doesn't bode well for a flash wider conflict, because we may have the guns, but we don't have the ammo to back them. China's been in a frame where it's been rattling its saber more and more loudly about the issue of Taiwan, and it wouldn't be rattling its saber if it weren't stockpiling the material to make good on its promise or on its threat. So you have nations that are depleted versus nations that haven't entered the fray but have been building up their own military capacity, and their economy have been supporting that buildup of military capacity over a period of time. Our economies have not been doing that. We've been maintaining our sort of military hardware models with as little sliver of our GDP as possible. So economically and militarily, we're not in a very good place to be having lots of fights with everyone around us.
I think any military expert who's looking at this soberly will agree with you, Mohammed, but unfortunately, I can't say that our friends in NATO, led by Jens Stoltenberg and others, are dealing on a sober basis at the moment. Listening to the rhetoric we're hearing doesn't square with the facts. Thank you for laying that dose of reality out for us and our audience. Mohammed Akunjee, independent candidate for Parliament in Great Britain, thank you very much for joining us here on TNT this week.
Real pleasure. Thank you.
TNT, today's News Talk. I'm Patrick Henningsen, signing out.